Myron, how are you?
Well, I'm great. Thank you.
I really appreciate your contributing to my comparative religious studies culture class. Uh, and you represent to me an authority in Judaism. Um, how would you identify the religion that you were brought up with?
The religion I was brought up in is Orthodox Judaism.
Okay.
I am now a secular Jew. I'm an American Jew. A Jewish American would be how I identify myself.
How would you distinguish those two identifiers?
Distinguish between Judaism and Americanism, there is no distinction.
No. Between
Mhm.
Orthodox Judaism and secular Judaism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Orthodox, I was observant during the early part of my life.
Explain,
Totally
ex
kosher.
right. Explain what
To-
observant means and then what totally kosher means, because that's the main thing that I'm interested in for my class.
I obeyed all the rules of traditional Judaism, all the rules that my mother imposed. Examples.
Yes.
On Sabbath, I was not allowed to tear toilet paper. The toilet paper was torn on Friday, and I only could use that which was there. I never ate outside of my home, never ate outside of my home. Only in my home where my mother prepared only food that was prepared and blessed in the appropriate way by the rabbis that were designated as being accepted as kosher food for Jewish people. I attended synagogue on all the holy days. I went most Sabbaths, uh, all the rules of traditional Orthodox Judaism I followed. That is distinguished from extreme or ultra Orthodox, Hasidic type of Jews. There's all sorts of different levels. I was Orthodox Jewish through my early childhood.
So, at what age did you eat a hamburger, cheeseburger, like an American?
Well, at about 14 years old, my father took me to a Chinese restaurant.
Oh, shocking.
And then I ate the greatest food I ever tasted, and thereafter was a secular Jew, not so much an Orthodox Jew, although much of the Orthodoxy stayed with me.
Uh, what's so bad about a cheeseburger in kosher terms?
A cheeseburger mixes milk and meat. Kosher does not allow you to have meat and milk together in the same meal. You have to wait, I think it was 3 hours before you could have a milk after eating meat.
Okay, I learned a lot about Judaism, unfortunately, from reading Philip Roth. And so obviously a lot of what he says satirizes this. But what are some of the benefits of having that kosherized identity? I don't know if even that makes sense to
Well, let's
describe that as,
broaden it out.
yeah.
Not just so much kosherized identity, but having an Orthodox Jewish background. So, for example, when I was young, I attended Hebrew school. I never attended yeshiva, but I attended Hebrew school throughout my entire youth. So I'd go to regular public school during the day, and starting at about 7 or 8 years old until I was at least 13, 14, I went to Hebrew school after public school. And I learned all the things that I could in that period of time about Orthodox Judaism, plus growing up in the home of my mother and father and being associated with my relatives, all of whom, of course, are Jewish, those who remain. And I just learned so much through the skin as well as through the head. And the effect on me, I think, was profound. And that is that I became concerned with causes, understanding, insight, dispute, difference, analyzing things. It was a childhood filled with asking questions and learning, getting answers, just growing intellectually, perpetually, all the time, thinking, analyzing, reasoning, trying to understand what's going on. And I think that derives much from my Orthodox Jewish background.
Would you say that characterizes Hebrew school versus public school that you went?
Oh, yes, very strongly. The main lesson I got from Hebrew school is disputation.
Ah,
What some people might think as of arguing, but from a reasonable point of view, always debating issues, trying to find out what the logic underlying an issue is, seeing the both sides or multiple sides of any issue, arguing back and forth, very often without any clear resolution except generating further understanding of the issue. So if I could give one example that I
please.
remember so vividly from Hebrew school, the issue is what is acceptable to do on Sabbath. For Jews, of course, Saturday is the Sabbath called Shabbos, as I understood it. And the word means resting, basically. The Lord rested on the seventh day. For Jews, the seventh day is Saturday. Okay, you cannot work on Saturday. Okay, so in my home, again, you know, the toilet paper, and even my mother couldn't make food from start. She couldn't turn on the stove, for example. So she had someone come in who was not Jewish to turn on the stove because she couldn't do the work of turning on the stove, but she could heat up something that was previously prepared. Okay, so the thing about this was, in the Hebrew school lesson, was if you're making a fire outside on Friday so that you could have it on Saturday, and a branch from a tree falls on the fire, can you use that branch that fell on the fire as a part of the fire, or do you have to remove it or not use that fire to heat up your food? I know this doesn't have much direct relevance to today, but we had fiery debates about whether on Sabbath you could use that branch on the fire. And we reasoned from different sources and authorities and quoted different elements of the Talmud on this, whether this was acceptable on the Sabbath. And that's the kind of debates that we had. Trivial, but pointed, no clear resolution. I don't remember whether you could use that branch on the fire, but I do remember the biting criticism and analysis on all sides of this very specific issue.
So you're a sociologist. You're an emeritus professor of sociology from Brandeis and Fresno State, I believe it's. No,
Well, I am a professor emeritus of sociology at Cal State University, Fullerton.
Fullerton.
Yes,
All right.
I'm also a retired associate professor of sociology and criminal justice at Brandeis University, formerly Chapman University College, along with my good friend John Freed.
Yes. Okay. What I wanted to do was connect your attraction and your contribution to sociology based on that kind of discourse that you had in Hebrew school. Do you think that there is a lot of comparison, a lot of equivalency even between how you approach, and I love the journal that you're involved with about the mundane, for example, things that I would consider kind of below the need for observation is something at some level you attend to, very seriously. And I guess I'd like you to connect those two dots in that way. Your interest in the mundane from your interest in whether a tree falls on a fire.
Exactly. Well, along with my friend Scott, I developed this journal called the Journal of Mundane Behavior. And it certainly struck me as the most appropriate thing for me to study, the most trivial parts of everyday life, and trying to understand what makes it possible for people to get along in public places. And we developed this journal. It was online and received a lot of notoriety. It's in its period of prominence, but it's just emblematic of my whole effort in sociology. What I became really attracted to in sociology was what you might call microsociology, looking at interaction of people in ordinary circumstances and even some extraordinary circumstances, but looking not so much at the broad macro level of, you know, what's going on in society as a whole, but how everyday life, ordinary people exemplify and demonstrate the qualities that you want to understand about human society, human relationships, and maybe even with an implication of applying ideas that you could derive from studying what people do in everyday life to how things could be made better. So for example, you know, right now what I'm really interested in is how we can conduct social life in, this is the period that you're recording in, the coronavirus period, where Americans are asked, and the people in the world are asked to shelter in place, and then slowly reopening and progressively, reasonably reopening to become more active economy. Well, the question is, how can you be safe and in public? How can you protect yourself, yet engage in social life? How can we deal with these challenges that we're facing? And, you know, it seems to me that my background in learning the various dimensions of the consequences of a branch falling on a fire apply very directly to trying to understand how we could be in public transit, how it could be in a bus, a train, or in a restaurant, or in any other place, have our space, interact, gain the gratification we can from social connection based on this disputatious approach. You see, I'm not offended when people say, oh, we should do this or we should do that. I say, okay, let me understand your position. So when people are protesting that we're not opening up fast enough, and other people are saying we need to stay safe and separate ourselves, you know, I'm looking at both sides, and I'm not rigid in my orientation. I'm perhaps understood to be moderately liberal in my political persuasion, but I'm very, very connected with many conservative people who have very different views than mine, but we can communicate. I can communicate with them. I can try to apprehend what they're saying, try to comprehend their points of view, fit them in with mine, seeing where there's possibilities, where we could communicate and then maybe address something in a productive way to benefit the society, the people around me. I think that my being raised in an orthodox situation, being trained, dealing with differences of points of view, enable me to be maybe a slightly better sociologist than otherwise I would be.
So you're really an observant Jew still.
An observing Jew. This is
Observing.
my friend. This is my friend John. An observant Jew. And much
Right.
of my research has been surrounded with the idea of observing. In my courses, I always give an assignment when I design my own courses of
Right.
just asking people to shut up
Right. And look.
and look. Be in the room where it happens and keep your mouth shut, and only know what you could learn by looking at people, listening to what they say, and mostly watching what they do with each other.
Right.
This is a very important part of my kind of sociology, by the way, which I used to call MSOS, Myron's sociology.
Well, that's that kind of deep subjective connection that I think truly great teachers have, is they're willing to reveal themselves, and they're willing to engage students at that kind of exposed, vulnerable level, that at some level it might just be Myron's view of things. And that's not so bad. To me, anecdotal information, of course, I write plays, so everybody has an anecdotal position, and you just listen to it, and then you step back and you say, well, there's any universality to this? Is anything that touches my heart with this? Uh, it's not just generating data, that data points, that we can come to an analysis that everybody would agree with. And I think that's why sociology is as much a humanities occupation as a social science. And that's
Well,
why I respect you, and that's why I talk to you more than I talk to other social scientists,
mhm.
right?
But let me give an example of how I've proceeded in the past in
Right,
doing research that connects a kind of anecdote, as you would call it,
right.
but I would say, direct interaction with the broader picture. One of my first projects in a graduate school was studying what we would call downward social mobility.
Mm,
We think of America as the land of success, achievement, accomplishment, and a lot of people do that.
right.
But what is an untold story, and has been pretty much untold, is a lot of people actually not only don't make it, but they falter, and they do less than either their parents, or they do less in life, accomplish less, objectively speaking, than their own intention, than their own early expectation. They fall. They fall from, you might say, grace. Okay. Um,
Or
and
luck. Grace to me is luck.
yeah, due to many factors,
Right,
including not great luck.
right.
Thank goodness somehow I have had great luck in my life, so I really appreciate that. But a lot of people have not had great luck. So what I did in the project is, first, I gathered statistics from publicly available sources to determine the broader context of failure in American social economic life. And what I found is that rates of elevation and rates of decline are essentially similar
Hmm.
rates. Okay. So the rate depends on the denominator. The amounts are very different. More people succeed in American life and elevate than decline. But in terms of the rates of those people who can fall and those people who can rise, the rates are I found to be very similar.
Hmm.
And then what I did is I interviewed engineers in a period of time long ago who started off at a pretty high level in their engineering capacity, but because their skills became less in demand over time, as new people came on and new techniques were developing in the various engineering fields, quite a few actually, faltered. They fell. They had lower status jobs. They became factory supervisors, foremen, or even factory workers themselves instead of using their engineering degrees and engineering knowledge and experience. And I tried to understand how devastating this was for them, and
Hmm.
found that it was very deep, and that American society is kind of punitive psychologically to those who don't measure up to their own expectations or their family's expectations and anticipations. And I think this shows a combination of looking at the macro context and then filling in the personal data.
Right, there are real people that are affected by it, and we're certainly going to see it in a monumental way subsequent to what we're those of us who endure will experience. This is after the Black Death of 1348, totally changes Europe, but creates a modern world. There would not be a modern world had the Black Death not happened. And I'm talking from a Catholic perspective. You know, we had 1,000-year dominance culturally, and about 1348, things started shifting, and then the printing press came, and then the great flushing sound as Catholicism is no longer.
But if I could add to that, John, in these great pandemics of the medieval period, very many middle-aged, well, youngish, well, we would consider middle-aged, but young people died. The labor force was thinned out. Now what we're seeing is the labor force isn't so much being thinned out, but elders, seniors are more likely to be suffering in this pandemic and dying in this pandemic. So the labor force isn't so much diminishing as happened in the medieval period, which enabled workers to demand higher wages in that period.
Right.
Right now, people who are dying are more likely not so directly involved in the labor force. So we're probably going to see, instead of what happened in the Middle Ages, where there was a rise in the living conditions of the surviving working age people, now we're more likely to see declines in the economic status of working age people, too many of them, and falling from the middle levels to the working class levels, as many businesses are going to disappear. So this is a major concern now, downward social economic mobility of the projected period after the pandemic has been resolved in some way or another.
Right. Well, it's not if things fall apart, it's when things fall apart. And I've been focusing a lot on human entropy. It's inevitable that this happens, and we live in a bubble. The 18th century lived in a bubble, and they're all missing and dead. Franklin and Jefferson and all of those people. But things fall apart. That is true in physics, and we're not going to counter that with almost anything that we do, other than being prepared for it and protecting our grandchildren. And I know your grandfather, and congratulations. That is really important, and whether we leave them with an oxygen-free environment that they cannot survive in, or no jobs, no hope.
But John, if I may interrupt you, John, you're making a concrete prediction, and I might dispute some of that and say that we have resilient qualities. And you're doing this course on religious cultures,
right?
And I so much appreciate that phrasing. So going back to my Jewish Orthodox background and tying that all in, I think that having a strong foundation in a belief system, even if you abandon it or modify it or move into another realm of meaning later on, when you have some sort of sense of purposefulness built into you in early life, somehow later life becomes more manageable, even with dealing with crises and terrible challenges. So, I believe there's some resilience built into all religious belief systems. If there were not that level of resilience, these religions would not have made it through all the catastrophes. There's no religion that I know that has suffered more catastrophes than Judaism, than Jewish people. Have survived for 5,000 years. And just as we got through all these terrible, terrible, horrible, nightmarish situations, somehow I think we're going to get through this. I'm not predicting how exactly, but not only the Jewish people, but all of our peoples who have some foundation and commitment to themselves and to their brothers, to their sisters, to their families, to their children, their grandchildren. Somehow we're going to get through this, and we're going to come out kind of okay in a different way.
Right. That's supported by the survivors of prisoner of war camps. The people who had no religious background died within a day or two. The ones who did survive had some religious background, even though they weren't necessarily practicing it. John McCain's a good example of his surviving, even though he's a pretty wild guy personally in terms of morality, but he had a rock bed foundation of his faith. And the ones who survived that, my father was a prisoner of war in Germany. He survived it, and the ones who survived with him all had that common principle. After he survived, he became my token atheist. He would preach to me that we're all just ants anyway. But he didn't go into that prisoner of war camp with that belief. He came out of it with that belief. But I think that supports what you're saying, even
But
though.
John, listen, if I may again
Yeah.
interrupt, that it is not just a religious foundation that provides survivability. It is a foundation in having a sense of the meaning of life. And it could be secular meanings, could mean other than purely religious meanings.
Right.
I think of Viktor Frankl and his work in logotherapy, meaning therapy, finding meaning, direction, purpose, intention for continuing one's life in a productive way, and somehow getting out of that prison camp, getting out of that concentration camp, somehow surviving the death camp, and then leading a productive, useful, beneficial life where you serve others and do for others, just like you do.
Well, he became a special education teacher.
Right.
That was what my grandmother had done, one of the first ones in the country in the 20s. And he followed that path. Never had any financial success, but had a meaningful life, even though he was not happy. His happiness did not survive. And I think you can see that in Singer and other people who write about the survivors. My favorite film and book is Enemies: A Love Story. Here they've made it. We're affluent. We got a lot of money, but whereas where you have to carry that misery and transition to a better life. But okay. Now I want to get back on topic.
You bring up an important point, John, if I could just stop.
Please.
Memory. I think that's a very important part of Judaism, is memory. You talk about benefit of religion, and not only of religion, but of culture. And what I'm so enthusiastic about now is how many minorities in American society that had been previously degraded are finding sources of pride in their culture, in their history, in their ancestors, in their parents, and hope for the future. And Judaism has a certainly strong grip on memory. We all remember. Many of our holidays are about remembering the suffering of our people and the ultimate triumph of our people, the survival of our people, and the need for us as individuals to take responsibility to keep that memory alive.
Well, isn't that what Passover is all about?
Excellent. And a part of that always is the next generation.
Yes. Okay. Good
and
point.
The whole theme of Judaism is to convey to the next generation the meanings of being a Jew, which is not only religious belief system. Beliefs in Judaism are actually not the core of the religion. What it is to know that you're Jewish. I remember that's the main message of my parents, to know that you're Jewish, to remember, and that each one of us carries in us all the suffering and sacrifices
And don't
every
children,
one of our ancestors experienced, and that we have the responsibility to make it so that our children, our grandchildren, and so forth remember what it means to be a Jew.
and in the Passover meal, aren't the children the speakers in that meal?
Well, I
I,
remember
no, I
I was
mean
the
I've
youngest.
been to one in my life, and it
No,
seemed that
I've
the
been
young
to so
people,
many that I remember the prayers, as
right?
many Jews do. Like I remember almost all the prayers I learned in the context of my Jewish upbringing. So we ask, why is this night different from all other nights? Why do we eat this instead of that? Why do we eat the flattened bread? Why do we eat the bitter herbs?
Right.
All for one purpose, so that the parents could explain to us, the father, the leader of our family, can explain to us why we do this and that in the religion. But we are always asked to ask the why question. And that's,
Mm.
I think, a great benefit to me growing up. Not so much what's the problem with me, or what's the problem with the world, or what's the problem that we're experiencing. Why are we experiencing this? Why is this happening? Try to understand the foundations and deal with the foundations of the problem.
That's yeah. My upbringing in Catholicism was kind of just the reverse. You were not supposed to ask the whys. You just learn the formula. You go to the hierarchy. The nun who taught me in the after school classes. I went to, like, you went to Hebrew class. I went to Catholic class because I went to public schools. My mother was Catholic. My father was a non of anything, who didn't give an shit. I don't use the S word. Uh, and yeah, if you questioned anything, you got punished uh, in those classes. You were just totally put down. But yeah, that's a big difference, I think, between the two approaches to young people's instruction. And
But John, let me ask you a
yeah,
question.
sure,
That's my tendency, is my Jewish background is I'm like a question asker, okay, rather than
right.
a point maker. And my question is, do you feel that by denying the opportunity for ordinary questioning, that you're led to a deeper probing of the essence of Catholicism and its belief system? Aren't Isn't there a motivation to penetrate more deeply and understand the underlying logic once as a child you're denied that opportunity?
Well, that would be true of the Jesuit order. They're very intellectual, not uh, appreciated by the more conservative uh, hierarchy. Now we actually have a pope who has a Jesuit background, and and a Franciscan one too. So he's a pretty good guy. But no, I think you have to leave that religion. I think maybe we're similar in that way. But what I became fascinated by are other people's stories. I wanted them to reveal what mattered to them. I've worked for nuns in Massachusetts, who I was their academic vice president, and very close to a number of them. And the president of that school worked in Nicaragua for the revolution, for example. She was one of the nuns with guns. And having conversations with her were fabulous. Another nun that I went to China with, uh, we walked into the Catholic Church in China that had exactly the same service I would have, you know, anywhere in the world, which to me is how you describe Catholicism, with this 80-year-old nun, the people in the foyer, half of them knew her and said, Eleanor, Sister Eleanor, what are you doing here? We're in the middle of Beijing, you know, and we're going to church, as if it were down the block. But I got to spend 6 weeks with that nun, with a group in Asia Network, in a railway car with her. Not, I don't want to do any scandal about this, but she was with, not, and that's why I think I appreciate nuns more than priests. Priests really cover up. Nuns, and even though they would wear the habit, were far more open and engaged and willing to talk about their lives. So kind of that denial I had in childhood is what made me really appreciate an interest in other people's stories. And that's why I write plays. That's why I, you know, engage in musicals and other kinds of things. I want to hear William Randolph Hearst sing a song, and I wrote it for him. That's believable. That is based in his life and his reality. That isn't a put down. That isn't this or other thing. He was going bankrupt that week that I write about. His whole empire was collapsing, but he's in love with Marion Davies, and it doesn't matter to him. And that's the mindset that I wanted to recreate and imagine. So it kind of was the denial was necessary for me to open up, where it seems in your history it got extended and applied to more human interactions, even though it started in very bizarre kind of disputes over how many angels can fit on the head of a pin, which which we know the answer to, and you do not know the answer to that.
How did angels ever get into the mix in a monotheistic religion is a good question. But let me just, John, you reminded me of a very powerful incident in my life, which may reveal some elements of my Jewish background and the effects of that background on my personal development. And that is, I was teaching in a Muslim country in Asia.
Which one?
I'd rather not say. But
okay.
It's a Muslim country in Asia.
Indonesia.
Not in the Middle East.
Indonesia.
Okay.
Indonesia. Do I have to guess?
Well, it could be.
Cambodia. Do I have to guess?
Okay.
Okay.
So, a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, I was teaching sociology. He was also a sociologist, and he invited me to a synagogue for a Yom Kippur service.
Right.
And, you know, I said, well, good. What's going on? And he says, well, it's a small congregation, because although there were a lot of Jews in this area historically, they have emptied out in this period of time because of current political circumstances, and they need a minyan. So, John, you know what a minyan is? A minyan is 10 or more adult Jews who've been circumcised and bar mitzvahed.
Okay.
I have been circumcised and bar mitzvahed, and I make up a minyan. And so he and I remember this guy, and it was a long time ago, went to the service along with my wife, and she didn't count for the minyan because
I can see why not.
Not a male.
Right.
And so we did the service, and these were what we would call Sephardic Jews. I'm an Ashkenazi Jew. Right. Sephardic Jews are derived from Spanish and Portuguese background. Ashkenazi more from, well, ultimately English, Polish, and Russian, European Jews. Sephardic Jews penetrated through after being expelled from Spain, went through Turkey and Persia and other countries in the Middle East in about the same period as Columbus. Coming,
1492 is when that
yeah, the
happened,
period
right?
of expulsion of Jews, the same as expulsion of Moors and Muslims from
Right.
Spain and the Catholicization of Spain. Okay, so there's a difference in culture and elements. So I never had gone to a Sephardic service, only going to Orthodox Ashkenazi services, and I was able to pray along with them.
Yeah.
And it was really kind of neat, you know,
Mhm.
to see that there were elements that transcended the difference. And we were praying, and all of a sudden outside I heard a lot of uproar. And we all stopped and went outside and saw masses of people, throngs, going through the streets, screaming, down with Israel, down with America, kill all the Jews, kill Americans. I said, oh, oh, this is so much.
Right.
It was 1973,
Mm.
that long ago, John, that
Mhm.
long ago. And it was the period of the Yom Kippur War where the Arab nations surrounding Israel invaded and attacked Israel. And Golda Meir, Israel's prime minister, felt that Israel had to take the blow and could not, under this circumstance, be the aggressor, even though they had warning that there would be the attack. And Israel suffered tremendously and was in tremendous jeopardy. I was teaching at the time in a Muslim university in a Muslim country, and I went the next day to my class and I said, do you want me to go
Mhm.
or do you want me to teach? You want me to teach you? And they say, oh, professor, they said, please continue to teach us. I say, what was all the uproar about? That was government-sponsored demonstrations. We want to learn from you.
Right. That's wonderful. Yom Kippur, that's is perfect because that's what I wanted to lead this conversation off with. Explain Yom Kippur. Actually, I'm part of a diversity, equity, inclusion committee at
Mhm.
Brandman, and we're doing features on major holidays and major religions. There's going to be one on Easter. I've already done one on Ramadan. And you were to be my expert on Yom Kippur, so expand on that. And also, I can kind of understand why Golda Meir waited for fundamentally religious reasons not to react.
No, no,
No.
John, it wasn't
Political
religious
reasons?
reasons. It was
Yeah.
political reasons.
Okay.
And the political reason was that the world had turned against Israel
Mm.
after its many previous successes, and that she felt that she had to sacrifice lives in order to gain support of the world. And Israel had to kind of be presented to the world as being besieged by attacking Arab nations. And ultimately, with Ariel Sharon being the general at the time, surrounded the invading Egyptian army in the Sinai after the sacrifice of 600 Israeli dead and many, many more Arab soldiers who were just following their orders. They surrounded and defeated the Egyptian army and decided ultimately after the war to give back the Sinai to Egypt, which is now in control of the Sinai, which is pretty much empty area. And the Israelis then also, at the same time as the Egyptians invaded and Sharon was successful, General Sharon was successful in his attack, Israel took over the Golan Heights and actually never let that go because they felt they were always threatened by attacks from Syria on the Golan Heights. So they were political purposes, not religious purposes.
Right. But she
Yep.
used it to good effect. So again, it's kind of how religion and politics can leverage each other,
Yeah,
and
good
that
point.
yeah. But explain Yom
About Yom
Kippur.
Kippur.
Yeah. How should I, what's the proper pronunciation?
Yom Kippur, but I say Yom Kippur.
Okay,
No, it's just a quick pronunciation. Don't worry so much about that. We know what you mean. It's a
right.
Day of Atonement, the Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, and
Explain the history of that and why
history.
it's
Um,
one of the most important holidays, right?
the
Holy
most
days.
important holiday for Jews is the Sabbath. Okay, the
Oh,
Sabbath.
okay.
Every
All right.
Sabbath is the most important day of the year. I remember this debate. We had that debate similar to the other. What's the holiest day of the year? And there were people on the Yom Kippur side. I was on the Sabbath Shabbos
Wow.
side. You know, the history of all these things are shrouded in incredible mythologies and belief systems. And quite frankly, I'm not able to give the definitive history of Yom Kippur, except to say that the purpose of the day is to think about your sins. And you should be, as a Catholic, very familiar with thinking about your sins. We all do. That's what religion does.
Right. That's what
One
Lent
thing
does for
religion,
Easter, right? Lent
yeah,
and
one thing that,
Easter are tied together.
that Judaism does is it takes the sins of one's year and collapses it into one day of contemplation and prayer and asking for the expiation of our sinfulness in general and in specific terms. And we're supposed to be only thinking of that. We're not supposed to be thinking of food, of activity, of anything else. But it was ironic that in the old days, a long time ago, when I grew up, Yom Kippur happened to fall out on the World Series because the World Series happened earlier in the year because there weren't all these playoffs. And Yom Kippur falls out, I think, this coming year, September 21st, something like that, September 22nd.
Right.
Jewish holidays always start in the night before, you know. So as soon as sundown hits, you start the Yom Kippur, and then it's one full day, actually 25, 26 hours of fasting. You're not supposed to eat anything. You're not supposed to brush your teeth. You're not supposed to do anything other than focus on your sins and whether your team won is going to, you know, how your team is doing. And you couldn't find out directly, so you had to be exposed. You had to overhear conversations about how your team was doing in the World Series. But it's not really traditional Judaism, we'll say. But the thing is that you pray all day in the synagogue, essentially. You go from the night when it's sundown, and then you hear Kol Nidre, excuse me. A part of the service is Yiskadal, where there's a later period where you mourn the passing of your loved ones, and you hear the Kol Nidre. And even, excuse me, but even as I think of it, it's very powerful emotionally. And then you go home, you can go to sleep, you can't eat anything, can't drink anything, get up the next day, go to synagogue, stay in synagogue, pray. And of course, I grew up in a Orthodox, so that was separated women and men, and it was very basic. It wasn't like a temple, there was no choir. There was a cantor who specialized in singing the prayers, leading the service. Everybody would sing along, and I would sit with my father and my brother and sit, you know, hour after hour. And I remember playing with his prayer shawl and being a little kid in there and just, you know, being totally bored and listless and sit there, kid, sit there, kid, sit there, kid. And what I think I learned from that was that I could tolerate long periods of just thinking, letting the mind roam. And I think that's very useful. You know, a long-term commitment to your own thoughts and your own being. And then there's a particular moment I remember very well where you knock your chest and you say each sin that you've done.
That could take a while.
Only, as I remember, there were 10 general sins, sins I've committed with my eyes, sins I've committed with my tongue, sins that I've done this. And it's ritualized, John. That's the
Right.
thing.
Ah,
Everybody says the same words, and you do it together. And you say, oh my God, that's me. But it's me put into the community of prayer, being people praying.
right.
And by putting it into the community and saying it out loud, say, oh, that's me. I've done that. You're kind of released and you feel a little bit cleansed, a little bit cleansed, a little bit cleansed, and progressively more so. And then you feel, wow, I've done the whole day. And then you hear the blowing of the ram's horn, the shofar blowing. Phew. And you let your breath out
Mm.
and you breathe. You say, oh gosh, I've done it for the day. But look, John, I tell you the truth, fasting for a day ain't much, but it's something. And prayer, sitting in the place, with your family, being in this religious community, feeling the culture, looking at the old men, seeing the women shielded by the curtain. You don't see the women, they're shielded, but knowing that they're there, the whole family, you're all in it together. This is your family, this is your belief, this is what has happened. And you're cleared. Your sins are erased from the
Isn't it?
book of
Yeah.
life.
Isn't there an element of making amends
Well,
as
making
well?
amends in my mind, maybe you mean something different, is by doing things that fix the sin.
Right.
But I don't remember that. I don't think that was a part of it, John.
Oh,
You're
yeah. That
not
was
obligated to do things, and you're not rewarded. This is a good thing to look at, though, John.
right.
Whereas what I understand and appreciate tremendously in Catholicism is that it's by good works in part that one is
Yes.
brought to the side of the heavenly,
Right.
your belief in resurrection with God, with Jesus.
Right.
It's through good works, and this is great. In Judaism, good works are inevitable, are what you do. You service people, you care for people, and you do good for people and humanity. But there is no reward for it other than the doing of the good.
All right. Talk about the afterlife, because
That's
that's
the
the big driver in Catholicism. The good works issue is one of the big dividers between Protestants and Catholics. They say it's all grace. Not all of them say that, but it's just kind of residual. That, oh, by the way, you also do good works. Where Catholic is far more proactive, or should be more proactive, because it earns you something, and it's not not the coin of Caesar that you earn. It's the kingdom of God that you earn in the afterlife. I've never gotten a straight answer about the Jewish position on the afterlife.
There's a good reason for that, John.
Okay,
There is no Jewish position on the afterlife.
that
There is
solves
none.
it.
There is none. I'm not saying that there aren't some Jewish groups, and as you understand, Jewish groups are very varied. There's all sorts of levels, all
Mm,
sorts of sub-belief systems. They're all Jews, but they're all many are different. But the mainstream of Judaism has no particular belief in the afterlife. There is no reward in heaven. There's no punishment in hell. Life is as we live it. The rewards and punishments are in our current lives. So take, the Jewish message that I got as a youngster is live the ethical good life for the benefit you could provide for other people primarily. You know,
Mhm.
love your parents, love your mother in particular, of course, love your family, teach your children, respect your wife, respect all women,
Mhm.
and you will generate your self-respect and you will feel good. And then when you die, my understanding is that there is nothingness and peace. I remember the word peace coming through. Peace.
Mm. Yeah,
That's the afterlife.
the end of Hamlet touches on that. His last words as he's dying is "the rest is silence," which sounds like a perfect description of what you've just said. You know, and
John,
then
could I ask you a question
right,
about that?
sure, right.
Was Hamlet a Christian?
He was a Protestant Christian. He's actually comes back from Wittenberg where he's studying, which was Luther's university. All right.
Hmm.
There was no University of Wittenberg until Luther showed up as a professor there. He's one of the first
So then,
professors
John,
of
let me ask you
theology,
this.
but he's
How
not
could,
a Catholic. He's an anti-Catholic. And
right,
he ends in kind of a Zen state at the end of the play and an absurdist state, which fits Calvinism. So that's my reading of Hamlet.
good, good. But then he he does kill um, his uncle,
Claudius,
Claudius.
right.
He does kill him with a
At the
poison.
end. But yeah, but he when he has the chance to, where Claudius is in confession, not I mean,
He
is in
can't do it
prayer.
then. Yeah.
Yeah, because he said, and then am I going to send him to heaven? Well, that would be a traditional Catholic view, but that's the middle of the play, and he goes in the other direction. He doesn't. He comes back to England because pirates have captured him, back to Denmark, have captured him, and it's totally absurd of how he gets back to Denmark. He has no plan whatsoever to deal with Claudius. Claudius knows he's got to kill Hamlet, so
Yeah.
that's where he gets involved.
Well,
But there's no intentionality on Hamlet
the
after that middle
question
point
basically I'm looking at
to
is
kill him.
revenge.
Yeah, he lets
And
go of revenge completely.
he say again,
He lets go of revenge
great.
completely.
Okay. Now, this is the point I'd say about Judaism,
Okay.
that in Judaism, there is really no concept of revenge,
Hmm.
that it is not something that you do. What really is very disturbing to me right now is the kind of land greed of many ultra Orthodox Jews who have created settlements on the West Bank in the name of recreating what they call Eretz Yisrael,
Right.
which is the ancient land of Israel to which the Jewish people are entitled and to which the settlers, the ultra Orthodox settlers, believe they should occupy. And it doesn't seem to me quite, excuse the expression, kosher, in the sense that it is more than their deserts to have this. That Jews should be in Israel willing and able to live with people who killed members of their own family, because
Right.
there is no real notion of revenge in the religion. But as I say this, I think of the many people that the ancient Jews of the period in the Bible, in the Old Testament, you call the Bible, that actually expelled people from the land of Israel and actually destroyed many peoples.
Right.
There's so
Women and
many
children and
genocides in the ancient, the old Bible.
yeah, well, that's tribalism. Uh,
Tribalism rather than revenge.
Worldwide, that's tribalism. But
Yeah.
it kind of brings up the chosen people
Right.
concept. And of course, in Islam, uh, it's Ishmael who's the firstborn of Abraham, not Isaac, because literally Ishmael was the firstborn, even though, Sarah or whatever was not the mother. Hagar was. Uh, but each of them says, we are the chosen people. And since Abraham, they're all Abrahamic religions, we're all peoples of the book, which, yeah, talk about the chosen people. I'm going to edit this.
Well, you all would remember that Tevye, the Fiddler on the Roof play based on Sholem Aleichem, says, "Can't you choose someone else, O
Right.
Lord?"
Right. Why
But
me?
the notion of the message, the messengers, that we were supposed to be the deliverers of the message of the one God, that is monotheism, and we were selected by God to bring to the world the idea that he is unity, that he is one. And you can't, in Judaism, you don't mention, even the word God. I shouldn't say it really, but you say the one. And it is a heavy burden of the Jews to represent that belief. And it has caused a great trouble because first in the pagan era, the Jews had to deal with all the pagan religions that denied the unity of the one God. And then in the Christian era, eventually developed the notion of the Trinity, which is very confusing to Jews.
And
Honestly,
Catholics.
yeah, yeah. And by maintaining a separate identity from Christianity, Jews have become subject of much historical oppression. And to me, the idea of the chosen group is not the most beneficial component of Judaism, because I don't feel that the unity of God as a singular entity is all that productive for human well-being. I'm not quite a monotheist anymore in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's a very useful idea in terms of dealing with the world, the natural world, because it gave permission for human beings to be dominant over the earth. We are chosen, we deliver the message, feel free to use the elements of nature for your own purposes.
But to use it up, in effect.
Exactly. So that is one of the factors that makes me not so pleased with the notion of chosen to deliver that message of monotheism.
Right. But it's very similar to Islam, obviously,
Yeah, yeah,
as a major touchstone. And I'm sure uh, Muhammad got a lot of good ideas from both Christianity and Judaism that he
certainly.
could employ.
But he was only a messenger too,
Yes,
a
exactly. Yeah.
prophet, and not
Not
a
God,
deity
not
himself.
unlike Christianity,
Right,
where
right.
Jesus is the main uh, actor, the main protagonist in the story, and we
Yeah,
all only get to
yeah.
heaven through
Well,
him if you're evangelical Christian.
but the idea of GD, God in Judaism, you know, the way we imagine it is, we're in the image of God, and presumptively it's a male, and we've made it into in European American history, made it into a white male somehow, and that God stands aloof from the world and is aware of everything that happens, kind of governs everything that happens, but not really.
Right,
That we have to have free will, but God knows what we'll choose. And
right,
there's all sorts of problems that derive, it seems to me, from the idea of the chosen people to deliver this message of this idea of what the deity is about.
Well, and it's self-serving, as every minister can tell you, if he or she wanted to admit it, or rabbi, if he or she wanted to admit it,
But
it
I will
works.
tell you,
It works.
mostly Jews don't concern themselves with that. Jews are concerned with the other things that we've discussed earlier. So
Right.
if we're leading to a conclusion of this,
Yes.
I'd really want to emphasize that Judaism is really about the bonding rituals and the transmission of those rituals down the generations so that we feel a chained connection to our ancestors and to our descendants, and feel a great responsibility to continue what we've inherited. And it's very difficult to continue with this inheritance in a world that accepts Jews. Ironically, Judaism survives more strongly when the Jewish people are oppressed, hated, despised, and made into the other.
Right.
But insofar as we are accepted, integrated, assimilated, if that word still has currency,
Right.
acculturated even, intermarry,
Right.
thin out our beliefs, thin out our connections, thin out our identity as Jews. If we forget we're Jews, if our children, grandchildren don't know that they are Jewish by ancestry, the chosen people no longer exist.
Do you feel that's true of your children and your grandchildren?
Well, my grandchildren are now infants still, but
No, but
my children still say the prayers.
oh,
My
okay.
children do all the rituals at home that we've done, but not kosher.
Right.
They celebrate. Especially my daughter celebrates the Sabbath and lights candles on appropriate occasions. She remembers the prayers for bread and wine and all those prayers that I used to say around the table. They know me very well,
Mm-hmm.
and they will continue. Will my grandchildren? Well, I have to live to make sure that they know that their grandfather was full Jewish, that they are part Jewish, that they wrap up within themselves many strands of America, but including that they are partially Jewish and need to continue with those same prayers, rituals, and feel connected and feel some degree of identity. Maybe some of my Chabad friends and Orthodox Jews would say I've roamed too far and they won't come back. My grandchildren won't come back, but maybe they will. Of course, it depends on whether I live or not, in part, and whether I encourage their continuous identification. So I got to keep on living, John. I got to keep on providing meaning for the next generation and the next generation as best I can.
Well, this video will extend your life. So I want you to know that, and I'm certainly going to give you a copy of it that you can leave to them. What would you say to them now about their Jewishness?
Well, of course, the pride, but more than the pride, when I speak to my son and daughter, they are brilliant. They are insightful.
Mm-hmm.
They are analytical. They strive for understanding of the world. They are deep people. And this is the message that needs to carry on. The element of Jewish culture that has become so productive for me, so beneficial in my career, they need to continue for themselves. And I know they will. They do. I mean, I am always impressed, continually impressed with my children. Now the questions go the opposite way. I ask my children. They help me understand. They are smart people, unlike their dad who's just muddling through still. So that's what I need to have continue, that depth of intellectual understanding, penetration.
All right, that's wonderful. Are there any questions that you would have liked me to ask? Obviously, I'm closing down here, that you'd like to express.
Well, what I'd like to express is this, John. You're doing a great course.
Thanks.
This religious cultures course, I think it's better than a religion course
Yes.
because you're looking at it both from religious and cultural points of view, and that fits Judaism and Islam and Christianity and Buddhism because they're all tied to cultures. So I just want to encourage you, express my appreciation to you. You are a great, dear friend.
Same.
Stay well, stay healthy, keep doing what you're doing, and keep enlightening your students. And stay my friend, buddy.
Thanks, Myron. I'll end with an Easter candle service that happens in, I think, good Catholic churches, where the night before Easter, the night before the risen Christ, the whole church is totally dark and one candle is lit at the altar. And everybody in that service has a candle. And from that one candle, then, the entire congregation is relighted. They all come from that one light source. And when you talked about that sense of community you felt in the Yom Kippur service in the temple, that's what I remembered, is more deeply than all of the theology that I got from my Catholic religion classes, all of the scandals of all of these religions. And that relighting needs to be done every day. And I like what you said, the holiest day is every week. It isn't Easter Sunday, 364 days away from the next time you'll have this moving experience, which you don't have anymore after a while. Just wears out. But yeah, that's how I connected to what you said. So I love talking to you. It's been a long time since we've had this opportunity, and for better or worse, our being locked down, has benefited by this experience that we've been able to do. So thank you for your participation. And you are now in my class, buddy. You are an expert. You're an expert speaker. And you will go on and on. We are the max headroom of the next century. Take care.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.